Hello and welcome to the Texas TribCast for Tuesday, October 21st. I am Eleanor Klibanoff, law and politics reporter at the Texas Tribune, joined as always by my co-host, editor-in-chief Matthew Watkins. How's it going, Matthew?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
Pretty good. Don't have much to talk about this week.
We already talked off camera with our special guest about tortillas in Texas Tech, so maybe we can...
If we run out of things to talk about, we will revisit the subject, but something tells me we will not, because this week we have a very important conversation to sort of pick back up on that we've discussed already on this podcast once or twice, but is becoming the predominant political story for the next 6 months or so, because we officially have a three-way race for the U.S. Senate on the Republican side of the ticket, where incumbent Senator John Cornyn will be facing off against current Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, which we knew. They've been sniping at each other for months now. But we now have our third candidate, which is U.S. Representative Wesley Hunt, who finally, after months of speculation, declared that he would be running for the seat. For those who, I do want to pick a bone with Renzo Downey, who is the author of our subscriber politics newsletter, The Blast, who I believe his headline of the newsletter when Hunt joined was "Hunt is in," when so clearly right there is the hunt is on. So the hunt is on, and we have quite the race ahead of us. So we're going to talk about what this means for the next 6 months of campaigning and the future of the seat.
He hopes it doesn't become a snipe hunt, if you will. Do you know that?
I don't
joke
even know what
yet?
that is a reference to. To discuss that and see if anyone else can help Matthew, be a better audience for his jokes than me. We're joined by Gabby Birenbaum, the Washington correspondent for the Texas Tribune, where she covers the Texas congressional delegation and the impact of federal policy on Texas. Gabby, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me back.
And Chad Hasty, the host of the Chad Hasty Show, which airs weekdays on KFYO in Lubbock and other stations across the state. Chad, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation.
Chad, you know what snipe hunting is, right?
Yeah, I know. I know where you were going.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Snipe hunting is when you take a new hunter out into the woods or wherever you're going, late at night, to tell them we're going snipe hunting, which is really just a ploy to ditch them alone in a field or something like that.
That feels like
it's a practical joke.
That's a
right?
pretty
Is
good.
that right? Yeah.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay.
Yeah, you got your
That's actually was a very good.
Thank you.
That was a
Thank
very
you.
good reference. Very
Apology
good potential
accepted.
metaphor. I'm sorry for not knowing more about hunting. Okay, so to get into this, I do think we should sort of briefly go through the candidates and where they each stand at this point. And Gabby, maybe you can sort of kick us off. Before we get to Wesley Hunt, we had this race, Paxton Cornyn, that's been sort of foreshadowed for months now. Can you talk a little bit just about what each of them represent and where they stood before he entered the race?
Yeah, I mean, I think with Cornyn and Paxton, you have, the sort of perfect representation of the establishment versus more political outsider dynamic, even though, Paxton is an elected office holder statewide. He's the attorney general. John Cornyn has been the senator from Texas since 2002. He was attorney general before that. Paxton has been AG since the 2014 election. So these are two heavy hitters, in Texas politics. Paxton has definitely been attacking Cornyn from the right, going after some bipartisan work he did on a gun bill. His, bit slow to support Trump in the 2024 primary. And Cornyn is sort of relying, I think, he's been promoting his pro-Trump voting record, sort of hugging Trump, his experience. And like you mentioned, now we've got a third entrant into the race.
Right. Yeah. Chad, I mean, what were you sort of hearing about these two contenders and how people were sort of feeling about the race as it stood so far?
It's been interesting because you have Ken Paxton, who, like Gabby had said, is seen as the outsider, even though he's been in elected office forever. Cornyn has been there even longer. He is seen as the more establishment. And for conservatives, a lot of my more conservative listeners who will get in touch with the show, they're tired of Cornyn. They don't like that he worked with Democrats on the gun bill. They don't trust and really believe that he is that much of a fan of Donald Trump. I don't think there's anyone out there that can envision Trump and Cornyn hanging out together and going and getting a cup of coffee, hanging out on the golf course. You've never seen that. You have seen that with Ken Paxton and Donald Trump. So I think that for a lot of listeners, they believe that is a real relationship, and that more importantly, when Trump is out of office, which will be happening in a few years, when Trump is out of office, who are they going to get to defend them? Are they going to get Cornyn-style politics or Paxton-style politics? And most of my listeners seemingly right now stray towards the Paxton MAGA style of politics that they believe they can count on.
Yeah, I feel like we need to come up with a new way of describing this from establishment versus outsider. When the outsider is the one who like hangs out with the president at Mar-a-Lago and like we can picture golfing with him, and the other guy, we can't, right? It's, I guess, maybe like more like old establishment, new establishment or something like that. I don't know, like traditional Republican versus Trump Republican.
Right. In the warm embrace, out in the cold.
Yeah. And of course, Cornyn would, I think, dispute any of this phrasing, right? As he has repeatedly and vocally stressed his alignment with Trump on virtually every issue since Trump has come into office.
Right, and he does vote very reliably with Trump's agenda. So there's sort of to your point, it's do they get a beer together?
Yeah.
Or is Cornyn but is Cornyn carrying the mantle of his policies in Congress?
Perhaps more. I'm interested if you agree with this, Chad. More of a style versus substance, style over substance conversation on those two things.
Totally. I think it is Cornyn has the record, and I think that if you look at Republicans in the Senate, there are a lot, if not most, if not all, of Republicans who are in the Senate, the old school Republicans, the Lindsey Grahams, the John Cornyns, the Mitch McConnells, even though Mitch is kind of moved back towards not liking Trump. But the old school Republicans in the Senate, I don't believe that they really like Donald Trump that much. I think they put up with them and they go with what's politically expedient. Whereas Ken Paxton, I think it's a little bit more believable that, those two would go golfing together.
Well, and Gabby, I mean, they were sort of already the establishment, not necessarily as a binary group, but just sort of like the groups that fund these races, that put money into this, were sort of backing Cornyn, not thrilled already to have him be challenged by Paxton, sort of kicking off this potentially very expensive primary. Sort of, how were they feeling about, like the money class? How were they feeling about this race? And then how were they what was the word on Hunt entering before he did?
I think the word on Hunt from the sort of DC establishment would be contempt. They, as he was signaling that he was interested in the race, exploring it, they put out a series of memos to donors and eventually publicly discouraging him from doing so. He, it's been reported that he met with Tim Scott, Senator Tim Scott, the chairman of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, which is Senate Republicans' sort of campaign arm, and they told him in no uncertain terms, no, we're backing John Cornyn. And so, they already have been frustrated by the Paxton primary of it all. Now they have yet another person. And I think for Hunt, that also plays into what he's trying to do, which is say, I'm not part of the establishment. Yeah, they don't want me here. That's for a reason. And so trying to sort of claim the Paxton-esque mantle among the Texas primary electorate.
So let's talk about Wesley Hunt. Like you said, people were not thrilled that he was going to enter the race, but he has now. He is, a current sitting congressman representing a district in Houston. Gabby, who is he? What does he represent, and how is he positioning himself?
Yeah, I mean, Hunt is a second-term congressman, so he doesn't have a huge record, actually in Congress. I think how he would describe himself is he's someone who can sort of bridge the divide between the sort of old money, old guard Republican establishment and the sort of newer MAGA energy. He's been a huge ally of President Trump's. He was out stumping for him all through 2024 on the trail. His district contains both the sort of old donor class in West Houston and Tomball, super MAGA suburb area. So I think his goal would be to try to replicate that coalition statewide. Obviously, he has, does not have the record that either Paxton or Cornyn has legislatively or in terms of what Paxton's done with the Attorney General's office. And so I think for him, it's more about trying to position himself as an heir to the sort of MAGA credentials more than running on his record.
Chad, what's the sort of name recognition there with Wesley Hunt?
Not much. He's been coming on my show, going back to late last year. He was coming on the show quite a bit, raising that name ID. That's when I went, okay, he's running for some. You don't have a guy from that part of Texas coming on to West Texas that often. So he started coming on, raising his name ID. He doesn't have great name ID. Those who are diehard talk show listeners, they may know who he is, or at least they've heard him. But is he as well known as Paxton? No. Is he as well known as Cornyn? Absolutely not. Nowhere close. But what I have heard from folks who like Wesley Hunt, it's usually a younger Republican, a younger demographic of Republican, and also someone who looks at Cornyn and goes, I don't think I can vote for Cornyn. Paxton, I don't like the either real or perceived baggage that Paxton carries with him. Wesley Hunt, hey, he's conservative. He's uber conservative. He's uber MAGA. Why not?
So the $1 million question, I think that everyone is sort of asking and maybe not sure of the answer now, is who does Hunt's inclusion in the race hurt more, Cornyn or Paxton? What's your opinion on that, Chad?
I believe it hurts Cornyn. And here's why. I think that there's a certain segment of conservative Republicans who won't vote for Ken Paxton because of the baggage. I think that they won't vote for Paxton, and they don't want to vote for Cornyn. They were looking for somebody. Now I think he takes votes away from Cornyn, and that's what gets Paxton and Cornyn into a runoff. I think that, again, I think Wesley Hunt wants to win. But if Paxton was still up by 15 to 20 points in the polls, I don't think Hunt would have announced right now that he was jumping into this race.
Do you agree with that, Gabby?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a fair point. I think the other side of that would be, and I've heard this from some academics, that, Cornyn kind of has and it's hard to put these on ideological spectrums, but Cornyn has what you could call the center-right lane to himself. And now you have both, even though obviously Cornyn wants support from more MAGA voters, now you have both Paxton and Hunt in the sort of MAGA lane, and that could potentially dilute that vote. I guess that would just be the other side of that. But I go back and forth because I feel like I see both sides. And a lot of polls show he's pulling 50-50 from both or close to it. So
I have a poll in front of me, the UT Tyler poll, which was admittedly taken in the field back in September before Hunt went into this race. Among the Republican primary electorate, they asked, who you'd vote for, Cornyn, Paxton. Cornyn led 39-37 with 23% undecided. With Hunt in the race, it was Paxton 31, Cornyn 29, Hunt 14, and 26% undecided. So actually the undecided number went up 3% with Hunt in the race, which I thought was interesting, but would support both of y'all's theory that at least, maybe not in a massive way, but from that poll, Hunt pulling more Cornyn voters than Paxton voters.
That is interesting because, right, I think, you might think from the outside, well, if he and Paxton are fighting over the same voters, but I do think the Paxton, like you said, the real or perceived baggage is sort of the wild card here as much as anything. And it's interesting, Hunt is sort of starting himself off. He's not saying, I'm Paxton without the baggage. He's saying, I'm a younger Paxton, which is sort of, certainly not an issue that's been raised around Ken Paxton. He's younger than John Cornyn, right. Younger than many of our elected officials.
But Gabby, you, I think, pointed out, or someone pointed out in the story that you wrote last week, that maybe he doesn't have to go after Paxton for the baggage because other people are going to go after
Just present
Paxton for the
yourself as an
baggage.
option. Let the people.
Yeah, it kind of feels like the Spider-Man meme where everyone's pointing at someone else,
Yeah.
right? Like Cornyn is attacking Paxton constantly and Cornyn's allies. So there's no need for Hunt to necessarily do that, especially if he's trying to win those same voters. Hunt is attacking Cornyn, I think, to sort of try to that helps prove his his MAGA credentials. And then Paxton is also attacking Cornyn, although for the most part, Paxton hasn't really started spending. And so with everybody sort of pointing at each other, it sort of creates a scenario where there's going to be negative chatter about each person, but maybe coming from a different one.
I mean, Attorney General Ken Paxton has, since before he even entered office, had some cloud hanging over him of different scales, and he has withstood an impeachment attempt. Most of his legal issues have been resolved. He has been elected 3 times to statewide office. Despite that, is there any reason to think now is different, and is the divorce playing into that at all, Chad? Do you have a sense of that?
I don't think any of the other stuff really matters for the average Republican voter. I don't think any of that matters. Maybe the divorce plays in a little bit. Let's be honest here. This isn't 2001. This isn't the old school Bush Republican Party where if you had a divorce or you cheated on your wife, that was automatically you're exiled into the out of the Republican Party. That's not this Republican Party. So I don't think there's a huge focus there. Again, I think it's a very small selection of Republican voters who look at Paxton and go, if you didn't have that baggage, I would vote for you. But they can't vote for Cornyn, so they needed that other person. And I think that's where Wesley Hunt comes into play here. And you look at Cornyn and you look at the Paxton camp, aside from some Twitter comments, no one's really punched down at Wesley Hunt. The Cornyn campaign went immediately after Wesley Hunt and went after him pretty hard on a few things that most voters don't care about right now anyway. He's missed 200 votes or whatever. No one in the Republican primary at this point cares about that. So I think, again, the baggage, the only baggage that really matters, I think, for Republican voters, again, I think it's a very small select number, is the divorce and how some of that may or may not be playing out.
Chad, it's been interesting, though, because when Paxton entered the race, the conventional wisdom and the polling seemed to suggest that he had a very large lead over Cornyn. And that lead, polling seems to suggest, has either shrunk significantly or disappeared. There has been, as has been mentioned, some negative headlines. The divorce, the impeachment trial in part was centered around, accusations that he was having an affair with someone. The impeachment also, a lot of very conservative people in his office directly accused him of a crime. And the U.S. Senate race is different than an attorney general race. Like, I think probably more people in Texas know who their senators are than know who the attorney general is. I'm curious. I hear you say that, and I believe you, and I think you're probably right that some of these problems don't have an effect on, Paxton among the Republican primary electorate. But then I see his lead sort of evaporating, and I'm trying to figure out what accounts for that. Is it a mirage? Are these things starting to land with him? Like, what do you think about that?
I think that it's where money comes into play, and you have the Cornyn campaign and money that from the Republican, Republican Senate committee that has come in and really spent millions of dollars already backing John Cornyn and promoting, hey, John Cornyn's best friends with Donald Trump. Those two like each other. John Cornyn has voted with Donald Trump 99% of the time. Not wrong, by the way, but they're promoting all the good things. And as Gabby mentioned, the Paxton camp, they've done a lot of online stuff. They've done, some tweets, but they haven't gone full-throated after John Cornyn yet in TV ads. So that's where the money war comes into play here, and who's going to be best, best in the best area with money. And right now, that's John Cornyn. He's able to get his message out there, and I still go back to, there are so many voters. They don't pay attention. Unfortunately, they don't pay attention to what happens down in Austin. They're not always paying attention to what's happening in the legislative process. And when it gets to some of the politics and all that, they really don't pay attention. They care about the votes, and they care about what they see on TV. And that right now I think that's what brought up John Cornyn's numbers and lowered Ken Paxton's numbers.
Yeah, Gabby, can you talk us through a little bit more like where the money stands and what that says about their prospects?
Yeah, so the Cornyn campaign, and I would say, more the super PAC that's backing him, and that's, being managed by Chris LaCivita, right, who's Trump's guy. They've, the constellation of pro-Cornyn forces have spent, I think, close to $30 million on this race. And I think if you turn on the TV, right, in any of the media markets in Texas, you're seeing pictures of Cornyn with Trump and that 99% pro-Trump voting record, stuff like that. The Paxton campaign, like Chad mentioned, really has not spent money at scale. And so I think, they feel like they can wait, they can afford to wait until later in the race. They also have a lot less money than the Cornyn campaign. And so I think we'll have to see once they start spending how that changes things. But I think a Cornyn optimist would say, yeah, he's closed the gap. All this polling shows that it's really close. And a pessimist might say, well, even in these races, even in these polls, he's a sitting incumbent and he's not really getting over 40%. And as you mentioned, there's still, about a quarter of the electorate in most of these polls that haven't decided. Yeah. And that's one factor. The other factor is, and I think this will be interesting too, more independent leaning voters, which primary do they end up voting in, if at all? Do they end up voting in the Republican primary and the Democratic primary, or sitting out? And so I think these are some of the things that we still don't know yet and are going to develop.
Yeah, I mean, I think the conventional wisdom, the thing we haven't talked about with Hunt, is that 3 candidates increases the likelihood of a runoff. And if you are the establishment candidate, if you are the incumbent, a runoff is not a place you want to be. And so that alone could hurt Cornyn in that way. I want to circle back really quickly to something that I find incredibly fascinating. Gabby, you mentioned the NRSC, right? The Republican kind of campaign arm for the Senate. And their strong support of Cornyn. I'm going to read a handful of quotes from NRSC Communications Director Joanna Rodriguez that have come out in recent months. What Ken Paxton has put his family through is truly repulsive and disgusting. No one should have to endure what Angela Paxton has, and we pray that she chooses to stand up for herself and her family during this time. That's one quote. A lot of people who trust Ken Paxton get lied to, so it isn't shocking to learn he's also cheating on his taxes and personal finances. Texans deserve a senator who protects children, not one like Paxton who signed off on your tax dollars funding the woke left. And Ken Paxton's incompetence as Texas's chief law enforcement officer has allowed crime to run rampant across the Lone Star State. They also chided Wesley Hunt for personal ambition for running into this race instead of, thinking through. It's wild to me to hear the NRSC, which is devoted to electing Republicans to the U.S. Senate, be blasting perhaps the front runner in the Republican primary in that kind of language, a year before election day. Tell me a little bit about what's going on here, and are they not worried that all these quotes are going to come back and bite them if we get to a position where Ken Paxton is the nominee?
Yeah, I mean, Joanna's not shy. That's certainly part of it. I think the things to understand are, one, these organizations like the NRSC exist to protect their own, right? I mean, their number one job is protecting their incumbents. Number two is growing the map, right? Is adding seats. And the incumbents will give them hell if they feel like, they're not getting properly helped there. A. B, they feel like they have a finite amount of resources. This is a big map. They're trying to pick up a seat in Georgia. They've got to defend a seat in Maine. They've got to defend a seat in North Carolina. Maybe Alaska comes into play. They don't want to be spending money in Texas. And so they feel like if they're going to spend, they'd rather spend in the primary to help Cornyn than have to, keep spending through the general, because they do feel that Paxton is vulnerable in a general election. And people can argue about whether that's true or not. If I've heard some people say, maybe Cornyn wins by 8 and Paxton wins by 4, and some people say, no, this really does feel like it's a liability, given what happened in 2018 with Senator Cruz, right? But I think the NRSC's mission right now is to A, protect the incumbent, and B, properly adjudicate their resources. And, they'll say any dollar we spend in Texas is a dollar that could have been spent in Maine or in North Carolina or in Georgia. And we don't want to have to worry about this red state, right? But yeah, I think there's obviously a real chance that Ken Paxton becomes the nominee, and then they are going to have to support him and perhaps eat their words a little bit.
And listen, it's not the most important part, but we should say in Texas, the attorney general is not the top law enforcement officer. They are the top lawyer. They have no independent criminal jurisdiction. It doesn't matter. Anyway, the other piece of this that we don't yet have is the much desired Trump endorsement that could sway this a lot. Chad, where do you see that going, and how much of an impact do you think that makes when we do hear from the president?
I think Trump stays out of it unless something insane happens. I think that Trump, he wants the vote of John Cornyn while John Cornyn is there. So he doesn't want to upset that. And John Cornyn has, for the most part, been very loyal to Trump while Trump's been elected and in office. Has Cornyn made other comments while Trump's not in office? Absolutely, he has. But while in office, Cornyn has been a loyal soldier. Trump appreciates loyalty. We all know that. We've seen that before, that Trump appreciates loyalty. I think he stays out of it. I don't think that he endorses in a primary. If it goes to a runoff, maybe he would, but I still think the politics of it right now for the White House, I think they look at it and go, we don't want to touch this because we don't want to anger either side because we're going to need their vote at some point.
Yeah, certainly. Right. It's like it could sort of bring all of this to an end pretty quickly if he did intervene. But you're right that there's sort of not a huge strategic benefit to the Trump camp to do that. Yeah.
Should we talk about the Democrats?
The other side of the ticket? I was just going to say, there is another race.
James Tallarico, Colin Allred. So far. Tallarico, of course, a lot of early Beto vibes, in terms of ability to raise money, getting some attention.
A Barack Obama shout out. Excited people on social media, all those types of things. I'm looking at this UT Tyler poll, which, polls the hypothetical matchups, has Cornyn beating Tallarico by 6, has Paxton beating Tallarico by 1. If you look at Colin Allred, and also has Tallarico actually beating Hunt by 1, although there's a lot of undecideds in all those numbers. If you look at Allred, Cornyn beating Allred by 6, beating Paxton by 3. Allred beats Paxton by 3. Tallarico loses to Paxton by 1. Is that what you said? On this poll.
First and foremost, before we go into that, go ahead, Chad. Give us the tell us what we should be thinking about these polls. More than a year ahead of the election season.
Yeah,
they're fun to talk about. They really are. They're fun. It gives us something to talk about, but it doesn't matter. I prove it. It's one of those I've seen. How many times have we seen this from the Democrats and the early race that's out there, whether it was Beto or even Colin Allred? Hey, we're excited. This person has momentum. We're so far away, and they're beating. Republicans have the numbers in Texas. Republicans are going to turn up the vote. We know that. They're going to show up for their guy, I think, no matter who it is. That part honestly does not worry me, who gets the nomination, and if Tallarico or Allred is going to be able to beat them. If I were the Democrats, and they will not listen to me, I know this, but if I were to give advice to the Democrats, go all in with Tallarico. You lost with Allred already. Go all in now with Tallarico, save your money in the primary, and just get ready for an all-out war in the general election. And I mean, Tallarico, I think, is the Democrats' best bet as of right now. Colin Allred has shown that he can't win. He can't beat John Cornyn. He's not going to beat Ken Paxton. Democrats kind of want that outsider, that younger voice. To me, that's Tallarico. He presents a different argument that's out there. Again, I don't think that he can win. But if I were the Democrats, I'd put all the money, all my cards on Tallarico and tell Colin Allred it's time to bow out.
Gabby, do you think the Republican establishment, the people working for the campaigns, agree? Would they rather face Allred over Tallarico?
I think they'd rather face Jasmine Crockett because they are definitely trying to push polls that show her ahead and promoting that narrative, which she's well aware of. But yeah, I mean, I think from what I can tell, they feel like they could win either way. And certainly all the history would back that up, right? It helps that they've already beat Allred, and the attacks on Allred, particularly I think the attacks around trans women in men's sports, right, were really effective last cycle. Those ads ran at scale last cycle. That's probably already in people's minds. Tallarico is newer, right? You have to go to the business of defining him, which they've already done for Allred. So yeah, I think maybe that's probably part of it. But Tallarico, that's what the primary's gonna be about. Can he get his sort of name ID up enough to beat someone who, like Colin Allred, who most people already know because he did run statewide?
So, Chad, your confidence in the Republicans suggests to me that you don't think that the Republican primary voters should be making a what's our best chance in November calculation here. Is that right?
No, I think that the Republican primary voters should vote for who best represents them and who they want to fight for them moving forward. Because, and again, until we see something that's different from the Democrats, they haven't shown that they can come out and win statewide office. And so, taking down a U.S. senator, taking a U.S. Senate seat would be a huge, monumental shift in Texas. And I don't see that with either of these candidates. And I think with Ken Paxton and with John Cornyn, eventually the Republicans are just going to turn out and they're going to vote in this. So I would just tell Republican primary voters, whoever you like the best, go and vote for that person.
Yeah, that's I do think a lot of the speculation about who can win, at the general feels so far away right now from, what the average voter is thinking about. To your point, Chad, of like, how much does anyone follow any of this? Like, I don't, I think the average voter is listening to the ads and going with what they know versus some like strategic 3D chess game, probably.
A game that the Democrats would tell you often doesn't work out very well, right?
Yeah.
Like it's harder than maybe we think to predict who actually will fare better in a general election.
Yeah, 3D chess sometimes gets on top of you a
Yeah.
little bit. Yeah. This is like a completely separate piece of this, but Gabby, I did want to just briefly touch on your story this week about a much sooner congressional race that is coming up just right around the corner. Early voting has started for Texas's 18th congressional district, which is, to put it lightly, a mess of a race. We've got like a very confusing situation on our hands. Could you just briefly sort of summarize what's going on there and what you're watching out for?
Yeah, I was trying to explain this to my grandma the other day, which was a very difficult task. So if people recall, Texas 18 has been sort of without a long-term solution for a while. It's in Houston. It's had a history of having sort of really storied Black Democratic politicians. It had been Sheila Jackson Lee for years. She died in the summer of 2024, after the primary. So the Harris County Democratic Party got together and picked the former mayor, Sylvester Turner, to be on the ballot in November. He won, he took office in January, and then he passed away in March. So the seat has been open ever since. Governor Abbott set the special election date for this November, right? So early voting just started. And what's even more confusing is that this election is taking place under the old lines, right? Because it's to fill out a term that was elected under the old map. But 75% of the voters in the current 18 are being moved to other districts under the new map. So there's a lot of confusion about who can even vote. a lot of neighborhoods, in the northern end of Harris County that are right now in Texas 18 that are going to be moved to 29, and candidates are really trying to make sure that voters know, hey, you can still vote in this special. And it's going to get even messier, right? Because there's like 16 candidates. It's, almost certainly going to go to a runoff. That runoff will happen in January or February, and that's going to run right into early voting for the March primary under the new lines, where Congressman Al Green, who right now is in the neighboring 9th, got moved into the 18th under the new map, has heavily hinted he's going to end up running in that primary. So this could end up being, someone described it to me as a hell of a door prize, where somebody, has been running for months, takes office in, let's say, February, and then immediately has to decide if they want to run in a primary against one of the most well-known Democrats in Houston, or sort of bow out. And then that seat could end up having another, pretty old representative. So there's just a lot of dynamics at play here: age, redistricting. That's going to be a storyline for months in Houston.
I will say I was sort of cheered by the detail in your story about how like the candidates were saying like they keep confronting people or like meeting voters who are and having to confront the issue of like the voters are like, well, didn't the lines get redrawn? Am I even in this district? How do I vote? All this. And it's like, wow, people really know about redistricting. They have really been paying attention. Doesn't help in this race. I feel sorry for those candidates, but man, the word is out about for all the.
I think a ton of awareness about redistricting from what I can tell from the candidates, and like people very much know. They're like, oh, but I don't live in 18 anymore, and the candidates are like, no, but you still do for the purposes of this election. And probably a runoff, so it's really confusing for people there, especially because, for many of them, they haven't had, a representative for months. They might have been kind of tuned out of this entirely. A lot of people don't even know that the special is going on.
Yeah, for all of our, perhaps not, for all of our, I think, correctly estimating how much voters pay attention to any of this, it appears that at least in the 18th congressional district, where they are getting sort of pulled around by the, powers that be, they at least are very, very attentive to what's going on.
We should just have we should record ourselves saying like, but most voters actually don't know or care. And we can just like have a soundboard in the podcast and just play that.
We should start and end everything with that as a ceremonial. Exactly. Well, right. I mean, that is like such a complicated little corner of politics right now, but obviously we'll be watching to see what happens with that. And then the real race is on for the main primaries in 2026, which will be March 3rd, the day in between my birthday and Alejandro Serrano's birthday. So a big week for the politics team.
Press the voters don't care button.
Voters don't care. That is for sure. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. Chad, thanks for calling in from Lubbock, and Gabby from DC. That is it for this week's episode of the TribCast. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Our producers are Rob and Chris, and we will see you next week.